Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Sherman Reed. I'll be doing my January wrap up. So before I get started, if you are new to this channel, please don't hesitate to subscribe down below, as well as hit the notification bell. But let's get started. I actually read way more than I expected for January, so I'm very excited to go into all the books that I read and what I thought about them. But for the month of January, I read 13 books. And for those 13 books, I actually did the page count this time around because I'm doing my monthly like tracker and everything. And that is 5,230 pages, which is pretty good, I think. I don't really have an average right now in terms of how many pages I read per month, but I think this is pretty good for me. And out of those 13 books, I read one that was 2.5 stars, 3 books that were 3 stars, 2 books that were 3.5 stars, 6 books that were 4 stars, and then I read 1 book that was 4.5 stars. So for a majority of the books, I did read them. You know, I gave them pretty high ratings, so I'm very happy about that in terms of the quality of books that I read. So the first book that I want to talk about is Love Boat Taipei. This book I gave 4 stars. This book basically follows a girl who ends up, you know, going off to Taiwan for a summer vacation that was basically forced to by her parents, and there she ends up going on this program called Love Boat Taipei. Okay, well, there's 2 dogs outside, so they're like really loud. So she ends up going to this like summer vacation for, I want to say like 6 weeks or something like that, 6 to 8 weeks, and there she finds out a lot more about her culture as well as what she wants to do with her life, and just having the courage to actually do so, as well as defying her parents to achieve her dream. And I actually really enjoyed this book. There were a few like parts that I felt was very different than my own personal experience for this program, because I mean, when I went to this program, this was like 10 years ago, so I don't know what things have changed since then. But from what I understand from 10 years ago, like you can only go there if you are like, if one of her parents is from Taiwan. But for this case, like she actually has no like history with Taiwan culture at all. Like her parents are not from Taiwan, they're from China. So like I'm not sure exactly like how she got into this program, or if Taiwan government like changed the policies of like eligibility. But that was like the first thing that kind of like threw me off a bit, because I was like, oh, that's super different than my experience. And second of all, I was not a huge fan of the main character. Like I felt her beginning to be very like timid. I knew where she was coming from, like this whole like parents' expectations of her and what they want her to do versus what she wants to do. But there were so many times that she had like spoken up for herself, and she's just like, she gets guilt tripped so easily, and I'm just like, I guess, I mean, like, I don't know, I feel like I couldn't really relate with that because my parents were not really like that when I was growing up. But I do know other people's parents who were like that, so I can kind of like, you know, understand where she's coming from. But at the same time, also like, why can't you just like say something, like anything, you know, just be like, oh, like I kind of want to do like dancing, or like at least be like, can I at least do dancing on the side or something. Like she just like as soon as her parents try to like say anything, she immediately is like, oh, okay. You know, she just listens to them, even though she's like, I don't want to, you know, like it's like she had like no backbone whatsoever. And that like kind of irked me, because I was just like, you're just doing like whatever, like I don't know. Like, and then I'm glad that when she got to the trip though, she started to really like see what she wanted to do as a person and really just grow. So I did like that character development, which is why I gave that book 4 stars. Plus I really liked the romance. There were these like 2 romances that I really enjoyed, and like kind of like a love triangle situation going on. And honestly, I couldn't decide which one I like better. Part of me liked one guy better, but the other part I was like, I feel like he's also a really good choice too, so I don't know. But then there was that one girl, like a friendship kind of situation, which I was not a fan of, because from the beginning, like she seemed really nice, but then there were certain things that happened like shortly after that gave me like, you know, weird vibes. And unfortunately I was correct in some of those vibes, which is very disappointing. But that's also why I give this book 4 stars and not 5 stars, because I didn't really care much for that friendship. There were just certain things that she did that really like gave me some red flags. And then of course the whole main character in the beginning. But yeah, overall I still really enjoy the book though. But I am very intrigued as to what will happen next, because apparently the second book follows that friend as well as Xavier. So I'm super curious to see like what will come out of that, because from this first book it didn't seem like anything was happening. Like there was a lot of things about that relationship that I was like, I don't know, gave me like weird vibes throughout the entire book. So I'm super curious to find out like how that second book will be, and if there will be more of the first couple in this book. Then the next book that I picked up is The Shadows Between Us by Trisha Levenseller. This book I gave 3.5 stars. I actually found this book better than I expected. I don't know why I went into it with low expectations, probably because I didn't really hear too much about it for the most part. I just heard like a few things when it first came out like a year or two ago, but since then I haven't really heard much about it, and I didn't really know what to expect. But overall I really enjoyed it. This book basically follows a girl called Alessandra, where her goal is to woo the Shadow King. Basically she wants to get married with him, kill him off, and become queen of the kingdom. And so she ends up going into the palace with a plan to woo him, because he has these like balls and everything. So she ends up going onto one of these balls to get introduced to him, and she basically plays it off as she is just so indifferent to who he is that he becomes intrigued by her, because everyone is like vying for his attention and she's the only one that is just really different. So she's kind of playing off of the whole like she's not that kind of girl, or she's different. And so long and behold, it attracts his attention, and as she starts to get to know him a bit more and kind of understand like why he's called the Shadow King, and just understand like some of his like, you know, dreams and fears and everything, like she ends up, obviously they end up falling in love. And so the book just kind of continues on with that. The ending I definitely did not expect at all. I felt like it was kind of out there, but at the same time like there's always someone that I was like, that person I was very, very suspicious about, just because of who that person was and just where that person would show up at certain points in times. That just made me very like, you know, a little suspicious about this person. So overall I definitely enjoyed this book, and just better than I expected. Then this next book that I picked up is Unravel the Dusk by Elizabeth Lim. This book I gave 3 stars. This book honestly was kind of disappointing. I still gave it 3 stars, but I still really like the vibe of the book, like all the lushness, the culture and everything, the magic system. But what disappointed me about this book was just I didn't feel connected with the characters this time around. I didn't feel like as invested with the adventure. I don't know what, maybe it's because I read the first book such a long time ago, but I just felt like distance from this book. And I also felt like very confused at certain parts, because probably because I read the first book such a long time ago. I also listened to some audiobooks. I'm not sure if that might have played a role, but overall I just felt like it was good, but it just wasn't the ending that I expected for this book. And there's just a lot more to this book that I was just like about for the most part. So I'm happy that I finished the series, but I wasn't like loving the series. Then this next book that I picked up is Ready Player 2, which I gave 4.5 stars. This book was by far, threw me like, I was shocked by how much I enjoyed this book. I listened to an audiobook just because I listened to the first book on audio, so I wanted to just continue the trend. And it was done really well. I became so invested. I have not read the first book in such a long time, but I don't know, but this book I just like fell right into it again. I was invested with the characters, I was invested with the story, I was invested with the whole like the new version, and how like it basically like your whole consciousness goes into this digital world. And people are like, well, haven't you heard about like Sword Art Online? Haven't you heard about all these different like, you know, just like pop culture references? And I was like, oh, I love Sword Art Online. So like it definitely was like, you know, really cool to see that being referred into in this book. But it's just like things like that just like I really enjoyed. And so like as the book progresses with the whole like consciousness in the digital world, obviously there were like a lot of complications and risk that everyone had to take, obviously because your body is just prone there and is, you know, no one's really guarding it and stuff like that. But I just liked how the author took a lot of like incidences from other pop culture, for example Sword Art Online, and kind of utilized some of that like element into this book. I thought that was really cool, and overall I just felt like very invested in the story. Like I was super immersed with what was going on. I really liked the characters and just kind of like Parzival's like character arc, because after the first book apparently he has changed. It's been like a few years since then. It's been like 3-4 years since then, so things are different now that he is rich and successful and can basically do whatever the fuck he wants in the system. So it's just like his character has obviously evolved since the first book, and I kind of like seeing his shift from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, and just kind of like going backwards in terms of like really finding out like who he is. So yeah, overall I really enjoyed the book. If you really like a good sci-fi novel, I highly recommend this one. Then the next book that I picked up is Razor Blade Tears. This book I gave 4 stars. I actually enjoyed this book way more than I expected. I picked up this book because I kept hearing so many people talking about how like this was one of the best books, and people were shocked by how good it was, and I can definitely say that I'm one of those people now. This basically follows 2 fathers, one black man and one white man, where their sons who were married to each other ends up being brutally murdered. And so at first they were both like, you know what, we'll let the police figure it out, solve the issue. But after things kind of like spiral later, they realized that the police weren't really doing anything. They kind of put the case on pause, and so now they're trying to seek vengeance to find out like what happened and why were their sons targeted. Is it because of what they were doing? Is it because of the fact that they were gay and married to each other? Like, there's a lot of questions that are being asked in this book. And not only that, but both fathers actually have a lot of like criminal dealings in the past, and you can kind of see like a lot of racial inequality because of their past, but also not, because just who they are as, you know, a black man versus a white man. And I like a lot of that topic that we're discussing here, because there were so many incidences where Buddy Lee, who is the white guy, he's like, you know, he'll say something and he won't realize that, you know, if it was flipped, if he was black, for example, things would be completely different. I thought that was like so like well done. There was one scene in particular at the beginning where, you know, Buddy Lee is not doing so well, but Ike, who is the black man, after he got out of jail, he actually built a business for himself, is doing pretty well for himself now. And so they were just talking about, you know, their sons and everything. And I think Buddy Lee mentioned about how, you know, like, oh, will you give me the truck? And like, you know, maybe we can switch places, you know, if I can get the truck. And Ike was like, yeah, sure, you can switch places, you get the truck too, but you'll also have to get the other stuff involved, like the fact that you might be pulled over, because why would a black man drive such a nice truck, you know, stuff like that. And then Buddy Lee was just like silent after like this whole like spiel, and he was like, yeah, I never really thought of it like that. And I felt like that was such a good like conversation, because there were just so many instances that he just wasn't aware, like he wasn't like, you know, like, I mean, basically he was just ignorant about it. And but the fact that like the difference for him is that he was willing to learn and kind of like hear people's own experiences and kind of be like, okay, yeah, like I never thought about it, but I can see where you're coming from. And like I just thought it was really well done, and like it made me really enjoy the book because of how they're, you know, despite their like differences, they end up becoming like really good friends, you know, like they're bond together and their shared history with their sons, obviously, and just kind of their both shared regret about not really accepting their sons before their deaths. So I just really enjoyed this book, highly recommend it. I didn't give this book 5 stars, mainly because I felt like it was just a little too short, and I also felt like things just happened like really fast for some of it. Like the pacing wasn't done the best, I think, and that's why I gave the book 4 stars. If it wasn't for that, I think this book would be a 5-star read in terms of just the topics that were discussed. Then this next book that I picked up is a pho love story. This book was really freaking cute. I gave this book 4 stars. It basically follows 2 teenagers whose parents run neighboring pho rival restaurants, and how growing up they were always told not to interact with the other family because, you know, they're the enemies, etc. But of course these 2 go to the same high school and they do have like, you know, mutual friends, etc. And before long they end up interacting because of a extracurricular activity. And so they're trying to figure out, like, you know, why do their parents hate each other so much? It can't just be for the fact that of a simple like rival neighboring restaurant situation. So they're trying to like dig deeper into their past and find out what is what's truly going on. And in the meantime, they're obviously falling in love. So this book was actually really freaking adorable. I love all the food mentions in this book. I mean, they were kids of restaurant owners, you know, so they knew about their food, and I liked it how their extracurricular was literally them becoming food critics with some of their neighboring restaurants and just becoming, you know, more knowledgeable of the different various like cuisines out there. And not only that, but I really liked how they also started to embrace like what they want to do for themselves. I felt like the girl, especially, I forget her name now, but she always wanted to do something to do with art, but because of her parents' expectations, she was unsure about what she wanted to do. If she wanted to, you know, go with what her parents want her to pursue, or if she wanted to, you know, actually pursue her dream. And so I really liked her kind of like internal debate between the 2, and how this extracurricular activity ended up allowing her to flourish in what she really truly wanted to do, and find out, like, you know, just giving her the step up and the courage to tell her parents. But yeah, overall I really enjoyed this book. It was really adorable. If you like really cute romances, and if you like soft boy romances, if you like food, I think this book would be great. Then this next book that I picked up is The Keeper of the Night, which I gave 3 stars. This book was honestly okay. Like, I was expecting so much from this book. The whole idea about a Reaper slash Shinigami girl who has the power to do both, and just being shunned because of her Shinigami powers, and ends up fleeing to Japan to kind of like talk to the Queen of the Underworld, or the Queen of Death, and just finding out, like, basically just wanting respect for who she is, but now she has to go on these quests to kind of like prove her worth. I thought this concept sounded really cool, but unfortunately execution was very subpar. I still gave it 3 stars because it still had a really cool concept, and I still really liked all the references to the yokais and the cultural references. Like, all that stuff was really cool. But other than that though, I felt this book was just kind of underwhelming. I expected a lot more from the character herself, and not only that, but I was always wondering, like, what exactly is the reason for them to not like her Shinigami powers? Because isn't it better for her to have 2 sets of powers? Like, doesn't that mean that she's stronger? So she's not just having, you know, Reaper powers, but she has 2. Like, doesn't that just make her like more like sought after because she can do twice the amount of stuff that other people can? So I just don't really understand like where that whole concept is. Is it just purely like racism? Because that just seems like such a petty like way, like, I don't know, reason for me. So I just wish that the author went into a little bit more in terms of like why they were so against Shinigami powers. And it wasn't even the fact that she was like Shinigami. I feel like it was the fact that she had powers, because as soon as she showed off her Shinigami powers, they freaked out, you know. So it wasn't the fact that, because everyone already knew that she was like half Shinigami, like they've known her entire life. Yes, she was treated differently, but as soon as she showed her powers, like as soon as they knew that she had Shinigami powers, that's when, like, you know, the shit hit the storm. So like that's why I'm like so like curious to like why that's the case, because I don't think it's purely because of racism. Because if that's the case, the shit would have hit the fan long before she has shown her powers. So like, what is truly the reason? I feel like the author never really gave that information. So that's what I can really say about this book. I felt like for the most part I was very like about it overall. There's also a romance in here that I didn't really care much for. Not only that, but her brother, who has been loyal to her to a fault, was also very wary about this guy, about the romance. And I don't know, like I just felt like as a sister who has like, your brother has been with you this entire time, always like super nice to everyone, suddenly it's just like, this guy seems a bit iffy, like why didn't you listen to him? Like I don't like, there's just so many things I feel like could have been avoided if she had actually like listened to reason. But she was so invested with like power and with like respect and being like fitting in, she disregarded all of that. And that's why I didn't really care much for the main character. So that's why overall I'm disappointed with this book, but I still thought it was cool, the whole Shinigami and Reaper elements. Then this next book that I picked up is Bonecutter Stone, which I gave 2.5 stars. This is another one where I was disappointed with the sequel. This book, okay, so I don't know if again it's because I read the first book a long time ago or what, but I listened to this in audiobook this time, and for some reason I could not get into the narrator at all. I just felt like I couldn't really understand like what was happening at the time. I was just very confused, and finally I found a copy of this book. Like it was in my room somewhere, I just didn't know where it was, but I finally found a copy of it. So I ended up picking up the rest of it like with it physically, and that helped so much more. But even then, at that point I was already like not invested with the characters, not invested with the story. I didn't care what was going on. So overall, like, I just felt like it was just okay, like ended up being just an okay read for me. And I was just disappointed because the first book was such a surprise at how good it was that I went into it expecting more, because the first book was just, you know, like pleasantly really good, and unfortunately that was not the case for this one. So that's what I can say for this one. Then the next book that I picked up is The Bone Shard Emperor, which I gave 4 stars. This is a sequel to a series that I actually really adore. The first book took me by surprise, one of my top books of last year. I just loved how lush it was, and the magic system and the characters, and this book was no exception. The first half was actually, I don't know, it was a struggle for the first 100 or so pages. It's obviously not because it was a long time since I read the first book, so I just read the first book like a few months ago, but I don't know what it was, but the first 100 or so pages, I don't think I was in the mood for it, but it definitely was a struggle. But once I got into the story again, became invested with these characters and everyone, I became so immersed. Like I could not stop reading this book. I was like, I had to know what's happening next. I honestly thought this was a duology. It is not a duology, it is a trilogy. So that is the very unfortunate part, because I was expecting this book to finish by the time I finished it, and that was not the case. So I got to the end and I was like, wow, there's so much more that has to be unearthed now, and I need to know what happens next. So I cannot wait to pick up the 3rd book. I'm hoping that is the last and final book to the series, because I hate waiting for a series because I feel like it's just always the case where, you know, I get to the final book and I've read the first book or two like months and months ago, sometimes years ago, that by the time I get to the third book, it's like I have to either reread the entire series or just go into it hoping that I will remember what happened in the beginning, you know. And that just like frustrates me because it's like they're both not the greatest choices, you know. Like one's like spending a lot of time reading the books that I could be reading other things, and the other one is like hoping that I will enjoy it because I'm trying to figure out what's happening in the first 100, 200, 300 pages of the book. So I'm just hoping that the next book comes out very soon, hopefully by sometime this year, and then I can pick it up as soon as possible. But this book was fantastic. I love the characters. I just love Mephi. Like, he is just the most adorable creature ever. And like his little, like, whenever he learns, like when he learns sarcasm, oh my god, that was hilarious. So yeah, if you have not picked up the series, I highly recommend it. The characters are just so endearing, and the plot itself is also very intricate. This one was very heavily focused on the politics, so if you are not a fan of politically heavy like fantasy books, this might be a little bit hard, especially in the beginning, because that's also the reason why too, because not only was I struggling with just figuring out what was going on and I was not in the mood, but it was also politically heavy, and I'm not always the best when it comes to that type of like situation. So anyways, highly recommend it if you have not picked up the series already. Then this next book that I picked up is Firekeepers Daughter, which I gave 3.5 stars. This book basically follows a girl who ends up witnessing a tragic death, like her best friend's tragic death, because of a drug, indirectly caused by a drug that is now becoming rampant in these reservations. And so she ends up involving herself with some undercover cops and the police to kind of figure out like who is distributing this drug, who is manufacturing this drug, and kind of like what are the components and like involved with this drug. So as the story progresses, she uncovers like a lot of things about, you know, her community and about obviously the drug use, etc. I actually like, I like this book, but it just didn't connect with me as much as I thought it was going to. What I really liked about this book was the like mystery element. I thought that was really fascinating. I was super invested to find out like what was going to happen next, like who was behind it all. But when the reveal came, I was kind of disappointed because it just didn't really, I just felt like there were so many signs already that the character herself, the main character, just was refusing to see. And when she finally like acknowledged it, I was like, finally, that I just felt like, I mean, I know where she's coming from because obviously like who the person is like, you know, but I was frustrated because I was like, can't you just like understand this? Like, I don't know, as a reader I was very frustrated because I just want her to understand what was going on and just to realize it, because the earlier she realized it, like the faster things can happen, you know. I mean, overall I still really enjoy this book because I felt like the beginning was actually really well done with the characters, the culture, like learning more about the culture, and also about the drug. I feel like it was a very realistic portrayal of the drug like rampage and how its effects is on certain communities. But I think like I said, like the last quarter or so of the book with the whole reveal and everything was just like, it kind of went downhill from there. But I still really recommend this book if you want to learn more about the culture, and obviously if you like mysteries. I think this is a really good book. Then this next book that I picked up is the Bone Spindle, which I gave 3 stars. Honestly, this book was just okay. I thought it would be a lot better, but it basically is a mashup between Indiana Jones as well as Sleeping Beauty, and I thought the concept sounded so freaking cool, but I don't know, I just felt like the characters were lacking, the plot itself was lacking as well. I just felt like everything about this book was just mediocre. Like, it was not amazing, but it was not terrible. I still like, the one thing that I really liked about this book was just like the girl power, you know, how like they knew what they were doing, they were smart, they were intelligent, they were clever, and just kind of the dynamics between like the 2 main characters. I thought that was really cool. I just felt like the overall book, like the plot itself, was just kind of disappointing because I was expecting a lot more, I guess. Then this next book that I picked up is The Therapist, which I gave 4 stars. I actually really enjoyed this book. I honestly, B.A. Paris just has really good mystery thrillers for me, and I've always enjoyed all her books in the past. They're just the perfect mix of mystery and anticipation, intrigue, edge of my seat, like all of those factors. Like, it was just really well done. So this book basically follows a couple who just recently moved into this new gated community, and while they're trying to figure out their like own situation, their love, like their life together, they also realize that their neighbors are holding some sort of secret and about their house as well. So as Alice tries to uncover everything and just kind of like dealing with, you know, someone possibly going into her house, like breaking in, but she's like not seeing any evidence, but something about every time she goes in is like different, but she just can't pinpoint what is different. And there were just so many like, it was a page turner. Like I was super invested in the story. I wanted to know what's happening next. And not only that, but like what actually happened in the end, like it threw me off so hard because I honestly was expecting something completely bizarre. I don't know what, like I was expecting like, for example, I was expecting like someone like locked up like in their house, like living in the walls or something like that. And I was like, that would explain so much, but that was not the case. That was just a theory that I had. But like it was just a really good book. I was just, like I said, invested in it completely. And I just cannot wait to see what other books PA Paris will write in the future. Then the last and final book that I want to talk about is By the Book by Amanda Sella. This book I gave 4 stars. This book was honestly such a surprise because I really have not heard too much of it in terms of like, you know, what people's thoughts were after reading it, etc. But I just remember when I got this book, the publisher was like, oh, such a good book, you know, like you should definitely read it. And I just went into it kind of with like, you know, with no expectations because I just haven't really heard too much about it other than the publisher. But this book was actually really phenomenally good. It basically follows this girl called Mary who's just kind of socially awkward. She lives as if she's like in like 18th or 19th century like England, where she just believes like people should be treated a certain way, like guys should act a certain way, girls should act a certain way, and she kind of has all of these like predisposed like connotations about certain people based on just her experiences or her experiences with characters in books. So it says over here like her love of literature even inspires her to imagine herself as a heroine of a 19th century novel. And the thing is, like, she ended up going to a new school where no one really knows her, and her old friend actually ends up thinking that she's like super boring, just like not a good like match for her, and she ends up like ditching her as a friend because now she wants to move on to like newer friends and better friends and more interesting friends, etc. And so now she's kind of just, you know, figuring out high school, and she ends up stumbling upon another group of friends who readily take her in because they actually like her like love of literature and her, you know, ability to kind of like understand like men or boys because of her experiences with like 19th century characters. So she ends up, you know, involving herself with them and they become really good friends. But the thing is, she ends up becoming like invested or interested in this one guy that she specifically warned her friends to stay away from because he had the embodiment of a not so good person according to her. And so now she's trying to figure out like what to do because obviously she has kind of feelings for this guy, but then she doesn't want to seem like she is a hypocrite because of everything that she said to her new friends. And so now she has a dilemma going on. I mean, overall this book is just really freaking adorable. It has romance, it has amazing friendships, and I love the character development of the main character because she definitely went from a very like self-conscious, a little bit socially awkward, to, you know, blooming into herself and becoming more confident in like in actually vocalizing her thoughts out. So overall I just really like this book. If you have not read this already, definitely pick it up. I think this book is really great. So overall, those are all the books I read this past month. Let me know down below if you have read any of these books before, but if you have, let me know down below what you guys think about them. But as always, if you like the video, please do give me a thumbs up. It really does help out my channel. And if you'd like to see more content of me, please don't hesitate to subscribe down below. But as always, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.